Welcome to Lesson 13 for Unit C4. My name is Dan Olandisi and I use OpenSciEd in my classroom. Lesson 13 is the spot where our students take all the chemistry ideas they've learned and the mathematical tools they've gained and built so far and apply them to a real-world location. Let's begin by looking at where our storyline has taken us up to this point. In Lesson 12, the class has figured out that any engineering solution needs to meet a complex web of social, environmental, and technical constraints. However, students also realize that designing for a generic ocean doesn't work because different coastal areas face entirely different local conditions. When I start class here, I like to remind students that lingering question of how can we apply our math and science models to specific locations to protect oysters. I'll usually point back to our class carbon cycle model on the wall and ask students to keep in mind that whatever solution they propose has to account for the actual chemistry of that local system. Well, let's take a look at some of the design of this lesson in logistics. So we look over at our lesson overall and we find a 2-day putting pieces together investigation. The prep time is about 30 minutes, primarily spent on making copies for our site profiles, fact sheets, and planning documents. There aren't any wet lab chemicals or glasswares to set up, and nor do students really need any devices. It's an investigation driven entirely by data analysis, mathematical modeling, and collaborative discussions. I find it helpful to think of these 2 days as three distinct instructional chunks as opposed to our normal sense making, since we're not really figuring out anything new as a class. Chunk 1 takes up the first half of day 1. Students begin by examining local site profiles like Chesapeake Bay, Puget Sound, or a family aquaculture setup alongside a solutions fact sheet. What we're doing here is shifting students away from vague ideas towards precise quantitative engineering parameters. They quantify their criteria and constraints and then share their lists across groups using a 3-stray, 1-stay protocol. Chunk 2 spans from the end of day 1 into the middle of day 2. Groups use solution planning document to design their site-specific intervention. They perform stoichiometric calculations to determine the necessary mass of buffering materials, calculate water volumes, and predict pH or carbon dioxide changes, and estimate approximate costs. This is where students authentically apply the mathematical tools they built in Lesson 8 and 9 to evaluate whether their design works chemically. Chunk 3 occupies the second half of day 2. Students translate their dense planning documents and stoichiometric work into a large format poster on chart paper. The focus here is scientific communication, creating a visual model that clearly shows how the solution functions on the particle level, displaying the supporting calculations alongside the diagram, and explicitly identifying the trade-offs involved. By the end of these 2 days, students come away with 3 core realizations. First, they see that specific desired outcomes in a chemical system require specific inputs or changes to the system. Second, they figure out that criteria and constraints must be quantified to evaluate whether a design is successful. Third, they realize that mathematical models and stoichiometry allow us to quantitatively predict and model the impacts that proposed interventions will have on ocean chemistry. Now let's transition to the key instructional moments of Lesson 13, which begins in Part 3, where students are organized into small groups, reading one of 3 localized site profiles: a commercial family aquaculture operation, the Swinomish tribal community in the Puget Sound, or the Chesapeake Bay oyster farmers, all alongside a shared solutions fact sheet. Students will be highlighting local water volumes, depth, baseline pH levels, and community priorities on their handouts. I place a lot of value on this moment because it grounds our chemistry concepts in real-world human and ecological contexts. It helps students recognize that ocean acidification isn't a uniform global abstraction, but a localized issue requiring tailored solutions. While circulating, I watch for how students navigate the reading. Students often begin to notice that the constraints in the Puget Sound, where native species and treaty rights are central, look completely different from the commercial leasing constraints in the Chesapeake Bay. A common hurdle is the students feeling overwhelmed by the technical or cultural context in the text that they are given. I remind myself that neither I nor my students need to be a marine biology expert. All the necessary data is right there on the reference sheet. A jigsaw strategy works well here, which allows students to each be experts on one site before sharing out with their table groups. For part four, students are using a three-stray, one-stay protocol where one group member stays their table to share their site's initial criteria, while the other three rotate to other tables to gather ideas. Students are writing down parameters on chart paper and asking each other questions about local requirements. This step transitions students from qualitative brainstorming to quantitative engineering. It forces them to define measurable benchmarks so that any proposed design can be systemically evaluated for success. As I observe this protocol in action, I listen for how students write down their criteria. The class starts to realize that writing "make it cheap" or "raise the pH" isn't precise enough to evaluate an engineering design. High schoolers frequently revert to broad objectives like fast, affordable, or safe. When I circulate and see qualitative statements, I push them directly by asking how much, over what exact time frame. I refuse to accept answers like "a lot" and demand numbers, prompting them to specify an exact target pH shift or a maximum dollar amount per acre. In part five, students are working in groups with their solution planning documents. Notebooks open to previous unit calculations, scratch paper out, and calculators in hand. They are converting lease acreage to square meters and water volumes in liters, then calculating the moles of hydrogen ions that need to be neutralized using molarity equations. This is the mathematical synthesis of the unit. Students authentically apply stoichiometric calculations to prove whether their chemical design is physically capable of mitigating acidity at scale. While monitoring their work, I watch how students handle multi-step dimensional analysis. Students often realize that buffering a body of water requires converting logarithmic pH values into hydrogen ion molarity, finding the difference, and converting the moles to grams or metric tons of buffer. This is where cognitive fatigue can set in, and students easily get lost in unit conversions or decimal places. My reflex is to step in and solve the equation for them, but I try to resist that reflex. Instead, I direct them back to their ocean water calculations from lessons 8 and 9 in their notebooks, reminding them that they've successfully performed these exact molar conversions here. And I act more as a support guide and provide scaffolding as needed, knowing my students and the classroom in front of me. In this final activity of day 2 for part 8, small groups are gathered around chart paper with colored markers, translating their completed solution planning documents into a visual poster. Students are sketching particle level diagrams of water ions, drawing arrows to show inputs and outputs, and writing their dimensional analysis equations right next to their system models. This moment synthesizes math, chemistry mechanisms, and social constraints into a single visual communication argument. It prepares students for peer review by forcing them to make their conceptual thinking explicit. As I walk around, I look at how students choose to present their ideas. The class begins to see that a diagram showing particle collisions communicates the underlying chemistry much better than a wall of copied text. Students frequently try to copy word for word paragraphs from their planning sheets onto their posters. I explicitly instruct them that posters must feature a visual particle model alongside their mathematical evidence, showing how carbonate or base ions interact with hydrogen ions in the water. Now that groups have developed specific solutions and modeled their chemical impacts, students wonder how well their plans actually hold up against our criteria and constraints. I let them know that in lesson 14, we will present these posters in a peer evaluation gallery walk to give and receive constructive feedback. Let's take a look at some classroom tested tips and tricks. The stoichiometry on day 1 and day 2 can feel daunting for students as they perform unit conversions from acres to liters and use molarity to calculate needed chemical quantities. When I'm circulating the room, I like to view this math work as a realistic way for me to provide meaningful differentiation instruction to my students. Some groups will fly through the dimensional analysis while others might get lost in unit conversions and decimal placements. Rather than rushing to solve the equations for them, I use this time to offer targeted scaffolds or point struggling groups back to their ocean water calculations from lesson 9. It's worth being really explicit with students about why we are pressing for this math at this time. Pushing them to authentically grapple with stoichiometry now is essential because they'll be using these same mathematical practices on the transfer task assessment in lesson 15. To keep this facilitation manageable, I try to make sure that during my prep the night before, I work through the sample solution planning teacher reference sheet myself on paper. Strategically forming homogeneous groups here will allow you to spend more time with students who you believe need more support based on assessment data, previous experience with them working on math problems in class, or a recent formative assessment. For day two, poster creation, I make sure to have chart paper and colored markers set out ahead of time. Something that really helps students frame their posters effectively is showing them the poster feedback guide examples on the screen before they start drawing. I remind groups that a good scientific poster visually maps both intended effects and unintended side effects using clear particle diagrams and supporting math. There are no new words in this lesson for our personal glossaries. But for housekeeping at the end of day two, make sure the class carbon cycle model stays prominently displayed on your wall so students can trace unintended systemic impacts. Most importantly, collect all finished design solution posters at the end of class and store them safely. These posters are the central artifact used throughout lesson 14 for peer review, so keeping them intact is essential. Remind students to update their individual progress trackers before leaving for the day. That brings us to the end of our preparation for lesson 13. Next up in lesson 14, they'll present these posters, evaluate peer designs, and refine their thinking around trade offs. Thank you for taking the time to prepare for lesson 13. Good luck, and you got this.